Well, everyone, I hope you've been enjoying dinner, and I want to move on to the dinner speaker this evening. Again, I'm David Coates, Professor of Computer Science and Associate Dean for the Sciences and one of the chairs of this conference, and I again welcome you to Dartmouth and to Hanover. I just have a couple of things I want to say before I introduce our speaker. First of all, I want to thank our sponsors, in particular the National Science Foundation and Dartmouth College, which have been providing the funding to help support this conference, this workshop, and I'm very, very much appreciative of that. And our host is the Institute for Security, Technology, and Society. This is a research-focused institute at Dartmouth that includes faculty and students from virtually all corners of campus in arts and sciences, the Tuck School of Business, the Thayer School of Engineering, and the Geisel School of Medicine. And you'll meet people, I hope you'll all have a chance to meet faculty and students from all those parts of campus during the workshop. Also, the Tuck School of Business Center for Digital Strategies is assisting with putting on this conference, and the Center for Technology and Behavioral Health, which is part of the medical school and which is an NIH-funded organization focused on technology and behavioral health. So I wanted to introduce our speaker, Patricia Mechael, who's the Executive Director of the mHealth Alliance, which is a group hosted by the United Nations Foundation. And I first met Patty a couple of years ago at the mHealth Summit, which is an annual event that's growing, I think, exponentially in size. I think we are now approaching the 5th anniversary, the 5th iteration of the mHealth Summit. Really exciting conference that's held every December in the DC area. I hope you will have a chance to attend. Patty's been involved in global health for at least 15 years, way before the concept or the term mHealth was commonplace, and really a leader in this field. With field experience in over 30 countries, I think she's lost count, actually. She told me she had to sit down one night and write down the countries she's been to in Africa alone, at least 19 countries. In fact, I'm very grateful that she's here because she had to take a quick trip to Nairobi this week for a couple of days, and she's just back from Nairobi. That's the kind of crazy life that she leads. She has a master's in international health from the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and Hygiene, and a PhD in public health and policy from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And she, before joining the mHealth Alliance about 2 years ago, I think, as the director, she was Director of Strategic Application of Mobile Technology for Public Health and Development at the Center for Global Health and Economic Development at the Earth Institute. And she's also on the faculty at the School of International and Public Affairs and Earth Institute in Columbia University. So it's really a great pleasure to have her here, squeezed in between Nairobi and probably some other country. I have no idea where she's off to next, but with great pleasure, please welcome Patty Mechael. Want to switch anytime, just when you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you, David, and thank you, everyone. Many thanks to Dartmouth University and the National Science Foundation for having me here. It's a great honor and privilege, and I'm feeling really hip and cool speaking at an event that has SITH in the title. What a great acronym, and what a great way to use that. So. It's a real privilege to be here, and what I'd like to do tonight is to speak a little bit about privacy and security issues in this emerging field that we call mHealth. And so let me start by saying that my organization, the mHealth Alliance, has a broad mission to catalyze the use of mobile technologies to achieve global health goals, objectives throughout the world. And so we do a fair amount of work on issues such as maternal and child health. We are now in the countdown to the Millennium Development Goals. We have less than 1,000 days to achieve them. Many countries and UN agencies and development partners are now really looking to where we can leverage mobile technology in a systematic way to accelerate the achievement of some of these goals. And as part of our mission as the Alliance, we concentrate on a few sort of challenge areas that have been identified within the mHealth space. And so one of these challenge areas is evidence. So really looking at what works, how it works, why it works. Another area is around standards and interoperability. And I never thought I would become one of these people that jumps up and down and tries to really advocate for the adoption of standards. But it makes a huge difference when you are trying to address issues of the continuum of care for pregnant women, so that they can move through the system seamlessly and their children can be registered and be tracked for their immunizations, for their nutrition status, etc. We also work on issues of sustainable financing. So primarily a lot of mHealth in developing countries has been financed by private philanthropies and by bilateral organizations. And now we're starting to see an increased interest from governments as well as the private sector for investing in mobile health, which is really exciting. And then the last two areas that we work in are capacity. So we have huge demand for mobile health in developing countries, and really trying to help facilitate the development of capacity among various stakeholders, including governments, organizations that are looking to better leverage mobile in a systematic way. And then finally, which is what I'll focus on tonight, we do a fair amount of work on policy and policy-related issues. And one of the main areas that we've been working on in the policy space is around privacy and security. And so one of the first questions that a minister of health will ask when considering mobile is about privacy and security, because they're really concerned about how people's health information is being secured, is being transferred in a responsible way, because they see some of the risks involved in capturing this data and managing it and storing it in a thoughtful and responsible way. But before I dive into this topic, I want to relate a story from a recent trip that I had to Nigeria. And so the mHealth Alliance is currently working with a range of partners in Nigeria to leverage mobile in an initiative called Saving 1 Million Lives. And so the government of Nigeria has applied the Johns Hopkins modeling Lives Saved tool to the burden of certain maternal and child health issues. And they've determined that in the next 2.5 years, in the lead up to the MDG deadline, they can save over 2 million women and children. And so they've halved that number, and they've said, if we can reach 1 million, that would be amazing. And so one of the key strategies that they've identified as part of this program is to leverage mobile. And so last month I had the opportunity to visit a clinic while I was in Nigeria, and it was an antenatal care clinic, so pregnant women coming together to receive their antenatal care visit, and also for education. And so I was there in a room of 70, approximately 70 pregnant women, and so I ran what I love to do, which was like an impromptu focus group among these pregnant women. And so I asked them, how many women had a mobile phone? And I was surprised. I'd have to say that the majority of the women raised their hand, and most of them had their cell phones in their hand, and were showing me their cell phones. And so, which was really remarkable. And then I asked them afterwards how many had used their mobile phone to consult with a health worker or talk to a family member about health. And I would have to say I was pleasantly surprised to see that about 50% of the hands went up to indicate that they were using their phones to support health. Now, this is a far cry from when I began my work in mobile health, which was in Egypt in, I think it was about 2001, 2002, when I was looking at the natural progression of cell phone use for health. And the penetration rates in Egypt were about 3%. And so now we have penetration rates in developing countries upwards of 89%. So this is a huge opportunity to use mobile technology. And so what I'd like to talk about it today is that there is this great opportunity, but at the same time, there are certain challenges that we're facing in this field. And one of the major challenges that we're seeing in this field is around privacy and security, and even just clarity on what that means. And what does it mean to be responsible and to protect people's health information? So according to a 2011 report that was done by the World Health Organization on mobile health, governments cited that issues related, 1, to data privacy and security, and 2, the protection of individual health information as 2 of the top barriers to the expansion of mHealth. To put it simply, protecting personal health information is essential to bringing mHealth to scale. In many countries, when you talk to the governments, they'll cite that personal health information has to sit on a server in the Ministry of Health in order to be protected. And this is actually, we've done some work on this, but it's actually a bit of an urban legend. So when we start to look at some of these, the policies and the regulatory frameworks in developing countries, what we've found is that they're really lacking. And so earlier this year, and actually late last year, we partnered through the Thomson Reuters Trust Law Connect program with Merck's General Counsel and Baker & McKenzie to do a study of privacy and security laws and regulations at a global level, as well as in 7 countries around the world, including Chile, Peru, India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Uganda, and Tanzania. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to show a brief video that sort of highlights sort of why we undertook this partnership, and then I'll share some of the results that have come out of this research. And just to let you know how interested the law firms were. So the way the program works is that you put in a very brief description of the research that you're interested in undertaking, or the type of pro bono legal support you're looking for. And we had 8 different law firms bidding heavily to get this piece of research and to work with us on this partnership. And so there's huge interest in this particular area, especially among lawyers, because in many ways this will likely become sort of the next area of work in many ways around data and security and policy issues. So let me see if I can do this without. Is that correct? Oh, I may need help.
mobile devices are ubiquitous around the world. If you've traveled in many developing or poorer countries, you do see that mobile telephony comes in first before the landlines. The power of that technology can be leveraged to facilitate access to health in the locations where there's a shortage of sort of traditional on-the-ground healthcare infrastructure.
Mobile health is the use of mobile technologies to assist in the provision of health to people who need it in order to either get good health care, to get access to it, or to enhance the quality of the health care they're already getting.
There's a real gap in policies to govern and regulate the use of mobile technologies, particularly in developing countries.
Some countries don't recognize the privacy rights, the property rights of transmitting the information about their medical health.
For example, if as part of a pregnant woman's care, she's identified as being HIV positive, that information should only be disclosed between the patient and her health provider. And any information that moves through the health system should be anonymized, de-identified, encrypted when it moves from one technology platform to another technology platform. And these are some of the things that the field is really trying to work through, because the technology is moving much faster than the policies that govern them.
This project is intended to address on a global level a specific legal issue, which is that in many of those countries, the legal framework for protecting patient data transmitted through these technologies is limited or non-existent. The purpose of the project is to do an analysis of the current state of privacy and confidentiality laws and practices in those countries as affecting health privacy and mobile health.
When Merck approached us about this project, we thought it'd be a pretty formidable way to tackle some daunting problems.
It's such a new area of law, and the findings will really help shape policy and debate around mobile health. It can also influence technological change. If we identify that a certain tech barrier should be put into place to protect health data, those are things that medical tech companies, mobile phone companies, and healthcare providers can think about and plan for ahead of time.
You could really potentially have a game-changing impact in terms of expanding access to health in some of these countries.
So, as was discussed in the video, there really is a significant gap in terms of the policies to regulate the use of mobile technology. And this is particularly true in developing countries. And so there is a need for greater transparency and predictability vis-a-vis mHealth privacy. And what we found is that a lot of the private sector is reluctant to engage in mHealth activities, particularly in developing countries, because the regulatory environment is not predictable. There isn't a known set of standards that they need to apply to the work that they're doing. And there's this fear that over time, some of these issues may change or shift, or that they'll be subject to regulations that may then hamper their investments in this space. And so defining what privacy, security, confidentiality means in different parts of the world is quite challenging, because there's not only just the legal aspects of it, there's also a cultural aspect to it as well, and then you have customs, etc., that you then become subject to. And so it's quite unlikely that we can define a legal system that will apply to everyone in the world in a very straightforward way. But there are some basic principles that we're looking to promote across different environments. At the same time, what we don't want to see is the overregulation of mHealth in a way that inhibits innovation and keeps some of the potential that mHealth has from really occurring. So there is this sort of balancing act between really, protecting people's rights as well as their health information, at the same time providing a supportive environment for innovation to really thrive and grow. And so if these challenges sound a bit daunting, I completely understand, and believe me, I'm pretty daunted by them. But I think it's really important to, in many ways, sort of proactively start to piece together what the current situation is, and then to think through what some of the recommendations might be for really addressing some of these issues in a systematic way. And so the first goal of this research was to conduct a landscape analysis of current laws and regulations. And this analysis focused on the United States, the European Union, Australia, Singapore, Argentina, and Mexico from a global perspective. It found that the United States, unlike many other developed countries, does not have an overarching data privacy law that applies to all types of personal information, including health information. However, it does have a general health privacy law. Can anybody tell me what it is? HIPAA, with broad application that may be extended to mHealth to the extent that the data concerned fits the legal definition of covered data, and the entities involved in the processing of data qualify as a covered entity. Additionally, there is a patchwork in the US of federal and state laws that regulate particular kinds of data and particular industries, which may be extended to mHealth as well, which we saw with some of the FDA regulation and work there. US law emphasizes that mobile app developers should provide clear, readily identifiable, and easy to understand methods to notify a user when certain kinds of data are being collected and or transmitted. And organizations should maintain reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable security over data. And I'm sure everyone in this room could tell me what that means, as you guys are all the experts on this. In the European Union, omnibus data protection law covers all types of personal information, but there is generally no separate law regarding health privacy. So there isn't the same type of health-specific hiccups and angst that we have here in the United States around HIPAA in the EU. Health data is usually classified as sensitive data, which means processing health data is permissible only in limited circumstances and may be prohibited when transferring data outside of the EU. And so, notably, the EU may soon implement data protection regulation, which would impose same data protection and privacy requirements across the entire EU. So it wouldn't be country-specific, it would be EU-wide. The policy situations in Australia, Singapore, and Argentina closely mirror the European approach, including omnibus laws without specific laws for health data privacy. The same is true of Mexico, which only had its law in place since 2010. So this is all relatively recent progressions. What these countries share in common is a codified commitment to respecting the privacy of patient data. The story of privacy and security policies in the rest of the world, however, is markedly more complex. In order to take a closer look at the state of privacy law, research was conducted, as indicated in the video, in 7 geographically diverse countries that have all experienced significant growth in mHealth. So the reason why we selected them in the first place is that we're seeing massive scale up in many of these countries of mHealth applications, and sort of wanted to get in front of the wave because we do see privacy and security as something that needs to be addressed quite proactively in order to really benefit from this from a long-term perspective, because there are risks involved. It's the sort of thing that could come back to bite the field if, an incident happens and it becomes a public spectacle and there aren't the types of protections that you would want to have in place to make sure that people's health information was dealt with in a responsible fashion. So while I won't go into the details of each of these countries, the report will actually be launched in late June, so June 25th, in Washington, D.C. But many of these countries don't have specific data protection or health information privacy laws in place that would apply to mHealth data. And so while others have certain laws that may govern either health provider interactions with health information, there isn't anything that fully covers the spectrum of health data in the same way that we have in the United States and in the EU. Ethical and legal policies for the protection of health information in many countries is generally not well developed, and Uganda was probably the largest outlier in terms of policy regulation, where they don't recognize the right to privacy as a human right. So again, then there the whole legal framework takes on a whole other dimension and or tone. So the question is, what does all this information mean? How can we use what we now know to move forward and work toward an mHealth privacy law framework that can guide and inform even the most geographically and culturally diverse countries? Perhaps the clearest takeaway from this research is that any effort at legislative reform to address mHealth privacy and security concerns must first take stock of the cultural, technological, and legal context at play. Such efforts must acknowledge the effect that these and other factors could have on privacy and security. Existing constitutional, ethical, and industry-developed privacy protections should be identified so as to provide a baseline from which reform can begin to take shape. And finally, the particular mHealth uses already in operation, in addition to those likely to be implemented, should be taken into account. So this report will come out in a few weeks' time, and I hope you will all take a look at it and appreciate the hard work that went into this. Baker and McKenzie contracted 7 law firms in the country to go through the legal frameworks and the privacy frameworks of the countries with a fine-tooth comb to see what could or should be applied to mHealth. The first draft of the memorandum was an 80-page document that you literally had to have a legal degree to make your way through. I mean, it's quite a remarkable piece of work that my hope is will be used by the community to help inform the way forward. And so I'd like to close by quoting, of all people, Marlon Brando, who once said, "Privacy is not something that I'm merely entitled to. It's an absolute prerequisite." And so each of us can probably imagine why an actor would feel so passionately about privacy. On a personal level, however, I think each of us can likely identify with that need to have some personal things that our lives, our family, and our health are kept that way, personal. We can all likely imagine how uncomfortable it would be to have information that we thought was private suddenly available to people who didn't have our consent to view or to use it. These are the feelings, security on the one hand, discomfort and anxiety on the other, that mHealth users may experience depending on how much they trust the laws and regulations that are in place to protect the privacy and security of their electronic health record and electronic health data. I hope to see mHealth realize its full potential. It's clear that in order to make this possible, we will have to build greater trust among the recipients of mHealth solutions in the privacy and security of their health data. This in turn will encourage more people to use mHealth and to benefit from its advantages. I'm eager to see how the findings and recommendations from the research I've previewed here tonight will help move the needle on mHealth privacy and security issues, and I very much look forward to answering your questions and hearing your thoughts on this important matter. Thank you again for having me and for the opportunity to speak here tonight.
We have time for questions here, if you'd like, please.
Thanks, Patty. Actually, we are starting a project in India. I'm Dr. Gugul, by the way. It's HIV adherence, and it's perinatal women. And it was a very interesting thing. For the first time, we also did this survey where we asked how many women have a cell phone. It's generally a shared phone for most of the women. That's the number one problem we've faced. So we are providing, I did read that for any mHealth project to be sustainable, I think you clearly said you should not be providing phones. I remember one of those lines in that Hopkins thing. But there's no other option, because NIH, when we went for their grants, it becomes an ethical issue. So if we don't provide the phones, it becomes an ethical issue. Who's going to provide for the phones? Who's going to provide for the other things? The second thing is, what is your take on these text messaging things? Like, if you go to the Leicester trial, everybody is like, gaga, you send those text messages, you improve the adherence. Everybody is out there saying, by text messaging, you can improve adherence, which I personally feel is not possible. Adherence is a behavior change, and you do that. So what's your take on that, and how do you maintain the privacy with the text messaging thing? Because that's something that's coming up more and more on any of the regulatory bodies. When you're submitting a grant, what's your take on that? How do we get around that? Even if we have to do it as a reminder, how do we get around that?
Sure. So there's been a lot of really great experience in this area, particularly out of South Africa, where they have significant prevalence of HIV in a lot of their mobile messaging program. And one of the ways that they've approached it is to actually make the messages quite generic. So you can't identify who is HIV positive or not. Everybody just gets the same sets of messages where HIV positive women kind of know what information they need, and a lot of it is the same types of information that they would need. And then on the adherence thing, a text message is only as good as the program surrounding it, and so I would look deeper. I think one of the challenges that we see with randomized control trials is that you don't get the full, and even in the publications, you don't actually get to hear the full story of actually what went into making that particular adherence program successful. And so I think it's important to sort of cross-reference different programs to see out of all of them what we can learn in terms of how best to approach a particular program, and to also progressively test different approaches with your local population until you find the one that seems to be working through your formative research, and then moving that to scale. I hope that helps. Any other questions? Sure.
So I'm in the health field. I'm not in the security field, and I'm wondering how you see keeping health or mHealth moving forward. Because to me, security and privacy are more of a roadblock or a speed bump. So are these moving forward on parallel tracks, or do you see mHealth sort of stopping and waiting for the security and privacy issues to catch up to?
It's definitely not waiting. So we're seeing mHealth scale throughout the world, and scaling by governments themselves, despite the lack of privacy and security regulations. But where we see, this work needing to happen is sort of in parallel with the advancement of mobile health, so that the environment is more supportive, particularly for people and the protection of their health information. But it's definitely happening on parallel tracks, and the innovation is certainly not waiting for the policymakers to catch up with them.
I had a question about your policy survey. I imagine this is a moving target, right? Because a lot of countries are developing these healthcare laws as we speak. Mm-hmm. And I hope that your survey is useful to other countries who haven't yet moved very far along those lines, and to technology companies that are curious about how they can adapt their technology to the various laws around the world. Is that part of the market you're kind of hoping this report will address, is technology companies or developers?
Right, so there's a couple of recommendations that are actually coming out of this research. One, and this is what we're seeing here in the United States, is that people are embedding the adherence to different regulations into the technology itself. And so you can program, either the software, or you can build things into the hardware that sort of push them into compliance with the regulation. That's sort of one area. And we're seeing lots of the private sector sort of taking that on and ensuring HIPAA compliance and all sorts of stuff. We're also, there are some recommendations or discussions around creating safe harbor legislation to govern investments in mHealth, so to sort of provide sort of a blanket protection for companies that adhere to certain key aspects of privacy and security in their work, and then therefore all of their work ends up being covered by sort of legal protections. And so there are also some ISO standards that exist. In the work that I was doing previously at Columbia, we were implementing mHealth in the Millennium Villages project in 10 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and we took the ISO regulation for personal health information and adapted that for use in the villages. So there are some ways to be more proactive in working on this, but there are also areas where industry is now starting to become a lot smarter about how it engages in this field. One of our major partners is actually Hewlett Packard, and their big thing is cloud computing. And so when you have huge sort of requirements by countries to store everything on servers in certain places in the country, etc., even though these aren't actual, what we found is that in the research that there isn't a lot of documentation that actually says that that's what you need to be doing, which is kind of interesting. But there is the sense that that's what we should all be doing. So there's a lot of education and learning that needs to happen around some of these areas where, I've been in the server room of ministries of health. The power is not very reliable. If I can go into the room, it obviously is not that secure. And so there are also those questions around, I think, a real need for awareness building on what it means to do like secure cloud storage or computing, because ultimately that is the way things are moving. But a lot of, if you mention that to, people in the Ministry of Health, they get all, nervous and prickly, because then they lose that level of control over health information.
Sort of following along the last two comments. I think oftentimes when we think about law and policy, it's considered the floor. What's the minimum we have to do? And I understand why that's really necessary for innovation and companies to feel like they're in compliance and they're not going to get sued, or they can pursue the innovation. But I think some of us who do privacy research and security too think it can be part of the innovation. If you do this well, you get more adoption from the users, maybe from also the providers, as well as the Ministry of Health. And so, a group like the mHealth Alliance and other groups, I think in doing some of that education you were just talking about, or even setting guidelines. So these are not laws, they're not policies, they're not even ISO standards necessarily, but guidelines that can say, okay, here's the minimum, but if you do a more protective thing in an innovative technology, you might actually get more adoption, which is what the companies want anyway. And I'd just like to hear you, if that's something you think about, because I know as a privacy researcher, that's what we think about, and we'd love to see privacy not be considered the barrier, but rather be considered a way to actually get the people who want to use the technologies to use them.
Right. No, and I think that that's definitely a role that the Alliance is looking to help support and foster within the community. Not necessarily to develop guidelines, but to help provide some basic recommendations on what people can do. And I have to say that even when I'm looking at mHealth programs and platforms, it is one of the things that I'm looking at, is to see how responsible is the organization or the institution over people's health information. Like, that to me is a very important consideration. And I know that's a very important consideration for governments when they're now starting to look at technologies, but it's not something that has been required either by the donors or by the governments, but it will likely affect future adoption of these types of technologies. So in as much as we can promote that and get people to become much more responsible, all the better. But even now, if you think about how health information is kept and stored, and even like paper records, I mean, it's not particularly secure. So we also have an opportunity, in many ways, as you were saying, to innovate to make health information more secure. And maybe that's sort of how, we should be approaching it as well, as part of the work that we're all interested in seeing take off. So, and I should have prefaced this by saying that I'm a fish out of water. I'm not a security expert. I'm a public health person. But it's great to be here. So.
Very good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Actually, Patty, I think that's probably true for most of the people here. Where not everyone is a security expert or researcher, and that's fine. And it's one of the great things about this workshop is that we've tried to bring together people from public health, from healthcare, from medicine, from engineering, from sociology, from business, from policy and technology and research and security and privacy included. So I just wanted to remind people that tomorrow morning we start at 8. Actually, the breakfast will be available earlier than that. If you want to take a nice walk tomorrow morning to the conference site, it'll be ready by 7:30, I understand. We'll be actually opening the session at 8:15, and Wendy will be giving her keynote at 8:30. So please don't be late. We have a very busy day. We have a packed schedule, a lot of exciting panels, and so I hope you will be able to join us early tomorrow for breakfast. I just wanted to point out, if you're not familiar with the campus, or even if you are, the location is not some place that many of you might have encountered before. First of all, if you're coming from out of town and don't have a Dartmouth parking sticker, you might find it convenient to park in the town parking, which is for a fee. The 6 South Street Hotel, where many of you are staying, is pointed out on the map. The Hanover Inn itself is, see if I can point at it. right here in the corner of the green, this is where we are right now. And there's some parking back in here, and there's a big parking garage right next to 6th Ave Street Hotel. Then to walk from the hotel, if you're staying there, or from the Hanover Inn where we are right now, is actually quite simple, and it's about a 10-15 minute walk. Weather's nice tomorrow. The green is right out front here. It's a big open lawn. In New England we call them greens. And in fact, it is actually green now. They spray painted it about a week or two ago. You'll see that. So you just walk right alongside the green here and past this big blob here is the tall tower. It looks like Independence Hall. That's our library, our main library building. So when you get there, turn left. There's a long mall here, a long street that you'll see as you right when you're even with the left side, the west side of the library building, the tower. So then you just walk down that long street until you get to the end. It's very simple. And when you get to the end, there's a little close-up coming down Tuck Mall. And I think we might even station someone here to sort of make sure you go in the right general direction. The Tuck School of Business is on your right. The Thayer School of Engineering is on your left. And right smack in the middle is a almost subterranean auditorium. And the best way to find our conference site is actually to go in the doors there, the sort of subterranean doors, and stay to the left. Don't go into the actual auditorium itself. And there'll be signs there, right, Tom, that will direct you inside the building to our conference room and the wonderful breakfast spread that we have planned. Just a reminder that tomorrow we will be recording the sessions. Actually, we are as well this evening, including the Q&A. So don't ask any embarrassing questions, I suppose. We do intend to post these with permission of the panelists and other speakers. So just so you're notified. And we also will be taking notes and producing written summaries of the sessions, which we plan to release through the web, both the videos and the text summaries. And we also have an arrangement, well, at least a tentative arrangement with IEEE Security and Privacy Magazine to publish a summary of the workshop using the text summaries that we're producing tomorrow. So I thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the dinner, and we look very much for seeing you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. We'll be opening at 8:15. You can come earlier if you like. If you have any questions about where to go, there are a bunch of us around who can point you in the right direction. Thank you.